To try and make sense of all of these new diplomatic routes, we're joined by Eric Mandel, founder and director at the Middle East Political Information Network, as well as senior editor for security at the Jerusalem Report. Eric, let's start with Iran and the strategy that got us to this temporary ceasefire in the first place, because you've argued that pressure, not restraint, is what changes Iran's behavior. So why has the fighting stopped?
Well, first of all, I've been listening to everybody, and I love listening to Yakov and Owen and Ariel. And one of the things I think that we have to make all of ourselves pause about is we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen with the negotiations. And I had to speak this morning, and I basically said, anybody who's going to tell you, and you're asking me to tell you what's going to happen, really doesn't know. Having said that, there are really troubling factors that are out there, and we should bring them up and why they are. So first, Iran is testing Trump and the United States. And the test is over Hezbollah. And will President Trump put pressure on Israel to stop its actions? And that would be an indication to Iran that it really has the leverage it wants. I worry about my negotiators going to Pakistan. And I believe, and I wrote a piece about this in The Hill over a year ago, do really great transactional negotiators in the United States, are they capable of dealing with a jihadist mindset? I think they've kind of refused to understand that when you're negotiating with an Iranian adversary, that you're dealing with something very different, that religious zealots are completely different than other people in a business transaction. So I think the other thing that and this is one of the things that I talked about regarding pressure, is I don't think we ever had an effective strategy to counter the clear Iranian strategy that was to wait us out. And that was one of the reasons that, in another Hill piece that I wrote this past weekend, that I was talking about, it should have been something articulated very clearly that we need to be putting ourselves on Persian time, not Western time, and to wait out the Iranians. And we could have, without boots on the ground, with arming the protesters. And I seem to be the only one saying that, although I did hear the president in his news conference the other day talking about that, but then kind of got off topic. And that would focus them internally, because there is going to be a day after these negotiations. Unfortunately, I think there'll be more negotiations. And then when that's going to happen is in the United States, there's a War Powers Act that's coming up. And that 60 to 90 days, a 30-day extension, that the president is going to have to go back to Congress sooner or later, and we get closer and closer to the midterm elections. So this is an off-ramp, but it's not a good off-ramp right now, the way I see it, of the United States and certainly for Israel.
Well, if these negotiations are going to be extended and extended and extended, have the United States and Israel as well then lost the legitimacy, at least in the international arena or even at home in the United States, to actually restart this war if the talks don't go anywhere?
Well, right now, this is a very unpopular war in the United States, and Israel is underwater as far as favorability, not just with Democrats, but overall in the United States. And it seems you had a major piece in the New York Times that basically blamed Israel for this war, the Bibi tail waving the Trump dog, and convincing Trump over the objections of the administration. Although I would say, if people have read that article, to take it with a large grain of salt. But the narrative is out there that Israel is undermining American national security interests, that plays into the far right and the far left, and it's now becoming more mainstream, certainly amongst the Democrats.
Well, what about Lebanon? A surprise this evening by Prime Minister's announcement that talks will happen, when just yesterday the messaging was military action was the way forward. Does this indicate that Israel is being pressured by Washington to wrap up the northern front sooner than Israel might like?
Well, when I saw all the bombings yesterday, which supposedly were the biggest in quantity, that I kind of thought that Israel was doing that. I also thought Israel was increasing its strikes towards the end before the ceasefire, that they kind of knew Trump might take an off-ramp. I want to differentiate between direct negotiations between Lebanon and Israel as a very positive thing, no matter what context it's in. But we cannot, and what's going on as far as a military action, which I think will be tamped down, Bibi will get under pressure there. But we must realize that the Lebanese government is still controlled to a large degree by Hezbollah. Hezbollah is still the strongest power. The Lebanese armed forces are infiltrated by Hezbollah operatives, including at the officer level. You had one of my colleagues, Sarit Zahavi, on a little while ago, and I'll be the one being a little more pessimistic. I just don't think Hezbollah can be disarmed. What it can be is if we make it very clear that we're not following UN Security Council Resolution 1701, but 1559, that Hezbollah, at least on paper, cannot be anywhere in the country and armed, that would be a good beginning. But as Yakov had said earlier, one of the big differences between before and now is that in South Lebanon, south of the Litani River, you're having the Shiite population basically moving north, which means Hezbollah doesn't have those human shields. And so Israel needs to have a buffer. The people of the north cannot just see a patrol road and a fence. They need to see IDF troops between them. And Israel on all its borders is going to now realize that strategic depth is important after October 7th.
What is the likelihood that something significant actually happens from these talks in the next 2 weeks? Should we be expecting something?
It depends how much the president's willing to concede. If the president is willing to concede that they have the right to enrich, which they never actually did, he may make some kind of deal, and this is the one I worry about, to give them sanctions relief in exchange for the 600 kilograms of 20 and 60% enriched uranium. I think that would be terrible. But I think one thing that really should be binary, black and white, is Iran cannot and should not have any control of the Strait of Hormuz, an international waterway. And really, this is a time for the international players to come and help the president in this defensive war, because if not, then all of the straits around the world, the Straits of Taiwan and Bab el-Mandeb, and the one between Malaysia and Indonesia, where there's so much trade that goes through, they all are vulnerable to become toll roads, and that would undermine the world order. So this is not just about the United States, Iran, with the Straits of Hormuz and oil and 20%. It really is about the whole world order. And at the end of the day here, I hope President doesn't work into some agreement with Iran to have a shared toll road. There should be no toll road. It's an international waterway, and that should be it. And we should be willing to enforce it, and there should be no bargaining on that.
Eric Mandel, great to have you with us on I-24 News as always. Thank you for sharing that insight.
Thank you for having me.